The ironic thing was, the people complaining the loudest about all of this and projecting the most insecurity ended up inevitably becoming what they hated. After trying to limit and take guns away for years, just before the collapse, they tried to buy them all up and ended up creating one last big gun grab. All of a sudden, it was okay to basically own whatever you wanted, just because they decided it was okay. And with that final thought, there was an unsettling lull in the shooting for a few seconds, and as quickly as the shooting had stopped, 5 nearly simultaneous shots took place, ending the gun battle I'd been listening to as I was walking to my destination. Such is life on the freeways these days. I said a prayer to myself for my buddies and kept walking. I could now see the plaza in the distance. While trudging up through the sand, I looked to my left and right in the brush and saw that the nettles had taken over everything there as well. There had been attempts to cut them down, as I could see multiple revisions and histories of thick nettle stumps only to be replaced with new ones. It looked like someone was maybe doing some experiments after having given up some spots, then trying in others. It had looked like maybe they had actually tried to keep this plant beaten back and then started maybe doing tests on it or with it. I took a couple of pictures with my camera's phone and kept heading towards the building, with the structure clearly in view now. Chapter 12, Arriving at the Plaza. I looked down at my watch, and it was right at about a half an hour since I'd split off from the team. I looked around for the alcove that was the entrance to the basement, and went to go stand next to it. I also decided to double-check my radio to make sure it was still on and at volume and power, just for something to do. Sometimes it was possible to bump, so you never know. It was still at full power, just like it was supposed to be. I turned the dial down until the knob had resistance, where another twist would shut it off. Then I twisted it a half a twist or so to where I usually like the volume to start out at. I figured I would give them another minute, since they did moments before have a gun battle and all, so I looked around some more. In front of me was the entrance to the alcove. There was a huge vehicle entrance and exit going in with steel shutters that were down, locked, and chained. I wouldn't be going through there. Next to the 2 steel shuttered entrances was a steel door with a card reader slot and pin pad with a red light, green light next to it. The red light was currently illuminated. There were steel reinforced concrete retractable bollards all around the entrance that were at full extension right now, defending the entrances from anyone trying to ram through. These bollards were rated to stop anything up to and including a semi-truck, but could be lowered for authorized vehicles during normal business hours. This building had been on lockdown mode almost exclusively since the collapse, and the bollards only went down to let in our vehicles, when it came time to visit. They weren't coming down now, and the steel shutters weren't up to let us in. As I waited for my team's radio signal, the telltale overcast weather that had blown in unnoticed became a drizzle. I looked around as all of the plants and structure got their bi-hourly bath and breathed in the refreshing clean air. The incoming communication didn't take much longer. "Analyst, do you copy?" It was our comms guy. I adjusted the volume slightly. Analyst was my code name, which they all called me for obvious reasons. I pressed the button on my radio to speak. "I copy. You guys all okay?" "We're fine, just some car trouble," they responded. I pressed my talk button and responded, "Copy that. I'm at the entry point, waiting final approval, over." Who knows, maybe they heard something. Maybe everything was fine. Maybe this was all just a mistake. There was a brief pause, then our outreach officer spoke over the radio. "Try the card and PIN, verify you can get in." I got the card out of my back pocket and held it against the card reader pad. It took 3 or 4 seconds for me to find the sweet spot, but I saw the red light flicker between red and green. Then I put in the PIN. The light stopped blinking and stayed on green, and I heard a heavy chunk as the bolt slammed back into the door. Knowing I only had a few seconds, I turned the handle open in the door and held it open with my foot. Hopefully an alarm wouldn't go off if I left this door open too long, but I suspected one would. Even if it was a local buzzer, not worth risking. I put the card in my back pocket and shouldered my AR. With my trigger finger pointed forward and my left finger on a temporary on-off flashlight switch adjacent to my foregrip, I activated my flashlight to see inside as all of the lights were off, heading down into the basement. I took my left hand off the flashlight and foregrip for a second, which made the light shut off, and I pressed my radio's talk button and spoke. Badge pin work, door open, copy. Our outreach officer responded, enter immediately, let the door close behind you. Talk to you in 1 hour, Delta side, copy. Copy, entering, talk in 1 hour. Delta side out. I put my left hand back on the foregrip and pressed my flashlight temporarily back on, and I went inside and let the door shut behind me quickly, but quietly. Delta side was the west side of the building in this instance. I'd entered in Charlie side. Alpha side was the main entrance, which faced north. Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta, clockwise from the main entrance. I thought about it for a second to make sure and nodded silently to myself. I swept the area, checking the corners to the left and right and down the ramp. It being clear, I moved around to find a spot of relative cover where I could listen for a second, so I took a knee to try to make my footprint smaller. I put my hand back up on my foregrip and was bumping my flashlight's switch, then sweeping to scan around the area, even though it was dead quiet in here with no movement. Hearing nothing, I stood back up to full height and shuffled with my back to the wall to the left corner of this new area, feeling suddenly alone. Then pointed my AR and thus my flashlight to try to see all the angles I could down into the Plaza's parking garage, then clicked my flashlight on, and thankfully nothing stood out as a concern. I shuffled to the other corner of the inside of the entrance and did the same thing again. Both sweeps of the area revealed nothing of concern, thankfully, so carefully down I went. Chapter 3, Into the Darkness. My strategy going into the basement parking garage was sort of a mixed jumble in my head. It didn't surprise me too much that the lights were off in here. They must only turn them on when they're expecting visitors, as lighting this vast area would consume a massive amount of power. I guess then that it also made sense that nobody would be down here if the situation has deteriorated. Either everyone was sick, or the place had been taken over, or both. Car trouble, which the team had mentioned, was secret code for the convoy being attacked. They must have been about to their spot, and the enemy force had been ending up camped out there. Knowing it was the last best possible strategic spot, the enemy must have tried to ambush my guys from it. Thankfully, we've trained for that stuff, but it is still very frustrating. One thing after another, as they say. I remember to dig a water bottle out at this point, lost in the thought as I began this leg of my adventure. I let my AR hang back down, then I flipped my bag around while still keeping it on by just taking one arm off and swinging it around. I had to do this a little more carefully since my AR was slung in front of me, but it was doable. This way I could feel what was inside my backpack and didn't have to put my head down. I reached inside to get a water bottle where I thought it would be, but my hand hit something else. It felt like a plastic zip bag, but I didn't remember packing a plastic zip bag in there, and I pulled it out. It was some homemade beef jerky from a member who liked to smoke her own proteins that the hunters brought back. What a treat to get these. She must have tossed them in my bag whenever one was tossing me snacks to do this mission alone. I grabbed my water bottle and put the zip bag out and put it in my pocket so I could get to it easier. Right afterward, I pulled out a strip from the bag and ate it at the same time so it could partially reconstitute. It was chewy and not tough and tasted barbecued and delicious. I flipped my backpack back around so it was on my back, and then I took another drink from my water bottle and put that in another pocket. Having food and water at the ready, I shouldered my AR again and began walking around the edge of the garage to minimize blind spots. I made my way past all of the neatly parked cars. I checked in the cars, through the windows, under the cars, and in between each row of cars, looking for signs of ambush, but nobody was down here. I relaxed a little, but not very much. Usually when you relaxed was when something horrible would happen. I looked at the cars more to think if maybe there was anything out of the ordinary.